Do you have trouble talking about your feelings? You're not alone. It's a topic that can make even the most powerful people somewhat squeamish. You're listening to Feelings Matter, where our mission is to demystify everything about emotions so that we can all get more comfortable talking about them. Join Tina and Michelle every week as we unpack a new angle on emotions, drawing upon the science of the brain and the psychology of human nature.
I'm Michelle Stinson-Ross, and I'm here with...
I'm Tina Schweiger.
This is Feelings Matter. We are recording this episode the week at which we pass a very significant milestone in the United States. As of this week, we have officially had over 500,000 people, 500,000 United States citizens pass away as a result of COVID. Since this is Feelings Matter, Tina and I both felt like we need to address the grief that we are experiencing nationwide as well as worldwide. Honestly, Tina, there's not really an awful lot that I can say that would even begin to cover this. So let me just hand it to you.
Feelings matter, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about them, and grief included. It's a topic that we really don't want to talk about. And in normal times, we really don't talk about it that much. It's something that's private, really. I mean, if you think about friends and family, coworkers in the past who've lost loved ones or lost their pet or experienced a terrible breakup or divorce, they grieve, and we try our best to give them space to grieve. We try to respect their privacy in a time of grief, that we assume people are doing what they can to take care of themselves, their family, and provide support for one another. If we're in that support circle, we're a little bit more intimately tied to it, but we still may not be talking about it. We may just be offering help or support, a shoulder to cry on, things like that. Grief is difficult. I think it's one of the most difficult of emotions because it's at the core of our human condition, which is temporary, and grief comes from loss, especially loss of loved ones. Right now, it's not a topic that we can push under the rug. And I think if we do, we're going to only worsen the longer term consequences of the COVID pandemic. Don't you think so, Michelle?
I think so. I haven't personally yet had that experience related to COVID. The closest I've come to it recently has been a guy that I went to high school with who passed away last week. We're in our mid-40s and he died of COVID. Although I wasn't close to him, I'm not really experiencing the loss of a relationship. It's not that we weren't close. This is just somebody I knew of, really. And yet I'm sensitive, I'm empathetic to the fact that there are so many people grieving loss after. I mean, there have been several news stories of multiple people in the same family.
Yeah, if you just do the math, because I love to apply math to things, it helps us put context around it. Mm-hmm. This is a person that you knew in high school. It's been many years, 20, 30-ish years since high school. Mm-hmm. Think about how many people that person knows in their life, in their circle. Your closest circle is roughly 5 people. Your next closest circle is 15, 20 people. And then you touch the lives of hundreds of people. So not even thinking about the hundreds of lives, you think about 500,000 people, multiply that by their 5 most inner circle, and you have 5 million people who are in a deep state of grief right now in our country, who may not even be capable of working, self-care, eating, day-to-day things are difficult at this level. Mm-hmm. If you expand that just one circle out, you're talking about 50 million people quite easily suffering from grief at some level. almost everyone in the country, I think, would be hard pressed to escape even thinking about grief right now. And it's important. And I think the biggest question that I would imagine people have is, what is it? How do I deal with it? What do I do with it? And will it ever go away? Those are the questions I've struggled with surrounding grief and looked into a lot. First and foremost, we're going to post resources in this related article in the notes that will provide links to counseling resources, grief support services, anything that we can find and pull together for a quick resource for that professional help. Anecdotally, I'm happy to share with you things that I've learned to do with grief and ways that I've learned to think about it that come from a mindfulness perspective. And I believe they help. You want to talk about it?
Yes, I do, but I want to make sure that we go ahead and mention now. I just did a quick look. So I guess one of the good things that has come out of COVID is that there's a lot more access to all kinds of counseling virtually. So I will say right here, right now, BetterHelp, Talkspace, both have specific outreach for grief counseling. Grief counseling is also something that is usually available in your community. Granted, not everybody has internet access, but that's certainly something that you can start with, is just go Google search grief counseling. Let's think about for a moment, how does grief actually show up? Is it possible, I guess, for somebody to be suffering from grief and not really even realize that that's what's going on?
Grief can be a surprise. If you're not aware that you're suffering from grief, or maybe you're just trying to get through the day-to-day and the logistics of somebody passing in your life, and you haven't even had time to think about yourself, all of a sudden you may just collapse. You may just turn into a puddle of sobs and tears. And at home, when you're quiet and you finally have a moment to respond, and that may be very surprising. You may have never experienced that before. And just know that that's the very first part of grief showing up. If you get surprised by an overcoming sense that your heart is going to explode, that you can't believe or you can't get your head around the loss, how can you go on? And you collapse into a puddle. That's grief. And the very first thing that you can do to help yourself in that moment is label it. Say, wow, this must be grief. If you hadn't thought about it before or experienced it before, it's pretty messy and ugly, and it can be surprising. It's a great question.
So other than being able to be aware of it yourself and treat yourself kindly, work through it, how important is empathy to getting through the grief process? How important is it that a manager at work understand that there's probably several people on their team at any given day that's dealing with the effects of grief right now? How important is it for even people at work to be empathetic with one another?
It's critical. In grief, you're very fragile. You're not very resilient. Simple things that maybe you could have easily brushed off at work, if you're still trying to work, are going to get to you in ways they haven't gotten to you before. If you're a manager and you know that there are people on your team that have lost loved ones from COVID, being sensitive to what they're dealing with is important. And what that looks like more specifically is you may notice behaviors more extreme or different than they've had in the past. Their level of self-control in any given situation will be different, and everybody will express their own sadness and their own emotions differently. And some will be healthy and private, and some will explode into anger or fights, and some will just start crying in the middle of a meeting. It will be unexpected and messy.
Let's circle back for a moment and lean into the recognition of what this moment is. I was so struck by the fact that this is the first time that we've lowered flags. We have nationally requested across the country to have flags lowered to half staff for the next 5 days. Each day representing 100,000 people that we've lost. What does it mean to our ability to process grief that there is a sense that we're in this together?
I think that's a good thing to acknowledge, that we're in it together. It seems grief is very personal, and right now it's public, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I had thought of a quote. I came up with it before we jumped on this podcast today, and it is, if you're surprised by your grief, the level of your grief, then the depths of your love were more than you realized. You loved more than you knew. And that leads me into where I've come from in mindfulness to learn how to deal with grief, which is understanding its counterpoint, which is love. Everything has an opposite. And the context with which those relate to each other is something that everyone can think about in their own way.
The national level of mourning, I have to give President Biden a little bit of credit. This is not to be political or at all. At the memorial prior to inauguration, he said something that I thought was very poignant, and he repeated it again yesterday. He said, "To heal, we must remember." There is so much that can be unpacked in that. Yes, we have to go through this grieving process. Yes, this loss is a wound. Part of the value of the national level of mourning that we're now going through is exactly that. In order to heal, we must remember.
That's very wise. It's counterintuitive to how you feel when you're grieving. When you're grieving, part of you wants to forget so that you don't feel like you're in so much pain. And what he said, that in order to heal, you must remember. It's a way to say, stay with it and move through it to heal. Go into the grief to heal. And remembering is painful.
I think it's painful at first. At some point, those memories, you tend to latch on to those moments of love, joy, shared experience. There's something about the human brain that we cling to, those things that inevitably do bring on healing. They bring a sense of joy, a sense of a life well lived, that yes, this is a loss, but it's a loss because of all of this wondrousness that is the human experience. And it does bring healing. I think back to losing either one of my grandmothers. They both passed within a few years of each other. And I wound up actually giving the eulogy for one of my grandmothers. And even within that eulogy, the things that mattered, our connection to family, that value of family and connection, those are the things that we remember. And those are also the things that help us heal.
Support for this podcast comes from Mindful Appy. Your feelings matter, and Mindful Appy can prove it. Try it out for free right now. Grab your phone and text the emoji that best represents how you feel to 972-480-6715. See how your feelings compare with other listeners of the Feelings Matter podcast. Again, text the emoji to 972-480-6715. And now back to the conversation with Tina and Michelle.
I've got a great visualization technique I'd love to walk us through.
Please do.
This is something you can try. You can try with yourself. You could share it with a friend. It's almost like a guided meditation, if you will. It's you to get relaxed and close your eyes and, not to go into a strange hypnotic state or anything, but really to visualize a body of water. And if you're suffering from grief, how might you think about that grief if it were a body of water? In the early days, when the grief is intense, it may be an ocean in the storm with thrashing waves and no land in sight. And you are scared, and you're dealing with fear, and you're dealing with being lost, and you're dealing with sink or swim, and you're getting tossed around and almost out of control with nothing to cling to. I want you to imagine that you're clinging to a life raft. And that life raft is the fact that this is temporary. The state you're in, as much as it is challenging right now, as much fear as you have that you may not get out alive, you will. And that life raft helps you remember that it's temporary. The other element that you have to have a body of water is a ground. If there's no ground, there's nothing to hold the water. Water is a fluid. The ground is love. And when it may not make any sense when you're in the middle of the ocean and the sea floor is miles down below, how can you ever reach it? At some point, those ocean waves will calm, the storm will pass a little bit. If you still have your life raft, maybe you notice you're in a little bit shallower water and you can see the ground. If you acknowledge that you can see the ground, that ground is love. If you can get your feet to it and reground yourself in the water to the feet, your feet on the ground, you can reconnect to that love, which will metaphorically bring you back to a place of remembering the joy and remembering the good and being grateful for that and celebrating it. It feels impossible at first. Holding on to your life raft, you're going to be surprised. You may get to the point where you're in a lake or a stream or something that's more manageable. You're still surrounded in grief. Maybe it's moving with you. Maybe you're never feeling like you're quite forgetting what you've lost. It's always with you, but it's more manageable, meaning you can see the land, you can find your feet, you know your life raft is there. You're still going to get a tsunami from time to time. It's just going to feel like it's going to flop you right down into the throes of the ocean, and it's going to be surprising, but hang on to the life raft because it's temporary. Go into it. And if you can swim, if you're comfortable with that metaphor, swim down to the bottom and just grab a couple of fistfuls of sand and feel the love of the ground and the sand. The more you can relax and the more you can let the water support you, the kinder the water will be to you. The more you thrash and the more you deny and the more you try to escape, the more you try to forget, the more you try to drown your feelings, the worse it is for you and the longer you'll be in that state, the negative state.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you doing that. Feelings matter. We aren't grieving alone. Although you may be going through your process privately, odds are that there's somebody nearby that's also going through this process. There is something helpful, something valuable in sharing that, whether it's grief or any other feelings. So one of the things that I've really come to appreciate through the course of therapy and everything else is taking a moment to validate the emotion that you're experiencing or that somebody near you is experiencing, because especially with grief, because it is so intense, it does take you by surprise sometimes, or it takes you someplace that you're frustrated that you have to go there right now because it just kind of comes on you. And to have somebody else there to validate and say, it's okay. You're still going through this process. You suffered a loss. The unexpected emotions and the fact that you need to pause right now rather than trying to muscle your way through and accomplish that thing that you think you need to accomplish. it's okay that you need to pause. It's completely normal to feel this way in this moment, considering what you've been through. And to have somebody else nearby that can just provide that validation is incredibly important.
That's an incredible gift. I think that context and perspective that you don't get when you're in grief, especially for a lot of us type A people that can kind of be frustrated that we're not able to accomplish as many tasks as we're able to. We're not able to meet some of the goals that we're setting for ourselves. Recognize you're in the company of millions right now who are suffering from grief. If you see somebody struggling, say, hey, it's okay to grieve, and it's okay. Do you need to reassess what you're committing to right now? Should you take the moment to show yourself some compassion and give yourself a little space? Are there a few commitments that you can let go of, that you can reschedule? It's sometimes difficult when pandemics keep happening, exposures keep happening, snowstorms happen, and maybe your house is still filled with tiny children and you can't get a moment to yourself. But the moment you can, support that person and say, hey, just take some time for yourself and make sure that you're calibrating the rest of your life around what you're capable of, and being sensitive to others who are also calibrating their life around what they're capable of, knowing that balls may be dropped, goals may be missed, timelines may be extended, costs may go up, all those things that none of us like about being less productive. They're going to be happening in droves right now. So we'll need to share a little compassion for each other.
Mm-hmm. It's odd to say it in the context of grief, but whatever else is going on with the job or the housework or the world's not going to fall apart if you pause for a moment. It's okay. And I think I'm like you, Tina, in that I put my nose down and I got to get it done. And this is frustrating that I don't have the capacity to get this done right now. And I can't tell you how often it's been valuable, and it's enough to kick me out of my lizard brain reaction to some things to give me permission to have somebody else look at me and my situation, and especially somebody that knows me well and knows all the things that I'm trying to accomplish in any given day, to go, Michelle, it's okay. You have permission to take a deep breath, take a break, go turn off the devices and do what you need to do right now, because whatever that thing is you're trying to accomplish, first of all, let's be real, you're not going to get it accomplished right now. But at the same time, it's okay not to have to carry that burden right now. That thing can wait. Take time for yourself right now.
I love it.
That is such a gift. That is such a huge gift. And I can't tell you, within my friend group, my support group, I've got several friends that kind of relate to the world in the same way I do. And I can't tell you how many times I've given another friend permission. I know you don't need my permission, but I'm going to say to you right now, you absolutely have permission to just stop.
Yeah, we feel guilty that we're letting others down. And it's natural when you're, especially in a service business or something where people are relying on you. You've been, brainwashed to be just like, if I'm not delivering, if I'm not doing, if I'm not productive, if this isn't happening, I'm letting someone down. Well, for those that are working for you, please be clear if things are a priority or if they can be pushed. If there's an emotional state that comes up that is disruptive, say, hey, you know what we're working on right now, it's not important that it gets done today. Take the rest of the day off, or take an hour for yourself and go for a walk. Generously and excessively extend permissions right now. If you're in the middle of a moment of grief and you're suffering and you have that self-talk where you're like, I can't stop, I have to get it done. Ask, is it necessary that this gets done today? Or maybe we could extend the deadline. This is the time to ask for that.
Either that or ask, is it really necessary that I be the one to do this? Can somebody step in and take care of this thing? Because I need a moment.
And that's just revisiting the commitments that you have on your plate and being flexible with yourself. If you've made a commitment you can no longer keep, go renegotiate it. If you've made a commitment and you can keep it, but you need to readjust the terms, do so. If you have to back out of it completely with the knowledge that you're in the company of millions right now who are doing the same thing. Don't feel too bad. Don't be hard on yourself.
Right. In the memory of. So one of the things that we touched on was that obviously remembering helps us heal. And that sometimes remembering something that was important to somebody else can open up an avenue. It's mind-blowing how many acts of kindness, good works begin because somebody is remembering the life of somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's tons of things. There's tons and tons and tons of things. A friend of mine started a mental health. It's called the Yellow Bench, and maybe I'll find the links and stuff for that. He lost his son to a mental health issue. The young man committed suicide, and he started a nonprofit where they put yellow garden benches on college campuses in several places, and yellow is for hello. The point being, in memory of his son, he is facilitating the opportunity for somebody to sit down and talk and open up and not keep bottled up those things that are making life difficult. Mm-hmm. He's doing that in memory of.
That's wonderful.
And moving forward with something like that is part of the process of healing.
Mm-hmm. You can be a gift to the world and create support for other people. And that's a really great way to process your own grief. There's a really interesting metaphor that's come up a few times in my classes. And it's the Margaret Andrews, my professor, is talking about a beach ball. Emotions are like a beach ball. And if you are in the water and you're pushing that beach ball underwater, you can certainly do that and you can hold it there. But eventually it's going to pop back up because you're going to need to go do something else. And emotions and bottling them up, it's similar to that. You're just pushing them down, but eventually they're going to buoy right back up to the surface. So it's an interesting way to think about it also in terms of water.
Mm-hmm. Before we close, I want to make sure to remind people that the Mental Health Services Administration does have a national 1-800 helpline. It is 1-800-662-HELP, 1-800-662-4357. It's available anytime, day or night, toll free. If you need to talk to somebody, and believe me, if you are grieving, you probably do need to just be able to have somebody to talk it out with, either a family member, a friend, or if you really don't feel like you have anybody, call this helpline. You are not alone. You do not have to struggle through this. There are people to help you.
There sure are. If you're struggling with grief right now, I hope this has been helpful. My heart goes out to you. Hang in there. Hang on to the life raft.
Because feelings do matter, and because being heard, especially in a time of grief, is so important, by all means, whatever you feel comfortable in sharing publicly, we're here to listen to you as well. You can leave comments on social media. You can follow up with comments wherever this audio is posted. We're here to listen to you too. So feel free to comment and share if you have a story maybe that you want to share.
Story. Yeah, Tina at mindfulappy.com. Email a story. We'd love to hear it.
We're here, and believe me, this community that is around Feelings Matter, they want to be there for you, and you can be there for somebody else. So feel free to share.